what are some essential supplements? If there is something like, what are some supplements a general population can take or should take, or you think will be beneficial?
Creatine's definitely on top of the list. So all the more because see earlier there was just research from showing that it's beneficial for body composition and strength gains and stuff. But now we even have a lot of research on cognitive performance, on reducing the effects of negative effects of sleep on cognition, sleep deprivation. So they've done studies showing that people who get less sleep, we know that mental kind of state gets affected the next day. They'll have weaker concentration, brain fog. Some of those things can be attenuated by supplementing with creatine. We have research on Alzheimer's prevention and things showing that creatine is beneficial for that. So I think definitely creatine should be something that most people should be taking. Magnesium is super important. I mean, just for a lot of different functions in the body. Vitamin D, some of these things come on top of the list. Just having adequate B vitamins. Some of these things maybe people don't need to supplement for. So I would just say try to first make sure your diet is great. It's a great insurance policy. And when I say great diet, of course, it's a vast spectrum we're talking about. Even within that, you can choose individual foods which are better for some things. Even for people who mostly don't eat animal food, just including the right kind of animal foods, like this thing, shellfish, certain kinds of shellfish. That way, oysters, mussels, things like crab and shrimp, like they have extremely like different nutrient composition in them that even someone who's doing broadly plant-based diet, if you just include some of these foods like liver, once in a while something. So there are vastly different ways in which you can design a healthy diet to even cater to different deficiencies that you have. But the first way to even find out that you have it is to, of course, test. Without testing, there are some basic things that you can take even without testing. Like you can take a dose of around 2000 IU of D3K2 without really testing. It's not gonna, harm you as such. It's a recommendation I'm comfortable making for general people. Magnesium supplementation is important. Creatine, protein is very important. So if you're not able to hit your protein targets, getting a good quality protein supplement is something that can definitely be beneficial. And yeah, I mean, if you open the can of worms of supplements, there's lots of things, man. I personally take like 30 or 40 a day, for different goals. Like some things I really need to prevent symptoms that I have. Some things are to optimize future outcomes more, to prevent certain chronic diseases or, optimizing biomarkers. So it depends on like how intense you want to go into it. For people who want a good introduction, as I said, I have a master class. This is not the same thing as my course. It costs $1,000, and there I give a basic kind of initiation into FM. The other basic markers to test for, the other basic ranges you should go by, and then the other supplements which I'm comfortable. People take in general. Like potassium is something that most people aren't getting, but it is certainly is extremely important for kidney health, for blood pressure, for a lot of things. So that way there are, I mean, yeah, I can tell you many that that people should be taking ideally, because assuming that people are getting enough is often not what I see in clinical practice. Even some people who come to me who are typically like healthy, they'll have something which are really off. I mean, B12 is very important. Iron deficiencies are critical. Like if you have it, then it's very important to get your iron levels up. Yeah, so I mean, nutrients are just having certain nutrient deficiencies can cause someone a lot of damage that way in different ways. And then there are some contexts where certain supplements become important around pregnancy or choline needs, like their higher iodine needs are higher, iron needs are higher. So different contexts also for kids, it's important to have more omega 3s. Like omega 3s are something I didn't mention, but that's something I feel everyone should be taking that way. Because you don't want to go high dose or something. So it's kind of perfectly safe to take a gram or so. You can go much higher than that, but then there's some evidence in the research that it might be linked to a small risk in certain kind of heart this thing condition called atrial fibrillation. But yeah, for most people at a low dose, 1 gram or so, omega 3s are great. I mean, they can be life changing for some people. So yeah, those are the few things I'm comfortable just recommending overall. Baki, there's a lot of scope to do many more things. And it depends on how deep you want to go into it.
So Johan, another popular thing is caffeine, like people losing weight and generally like people drink coffee. So is there any kind of interaction coffee has with creatine, or even on creatine, people with any lower EGFR or something, is that a myth that you shouldn't take creatine supplements?
And they actually address this very well. They did a study of 6 years looking at, you know, like I think 50 to 60 athletes, and they gave them I think 3 to 5 grams of creatine every single day, and they followed them for 6 years. There was no absolutely no effect on GFR whatsoever in the creatine supplemental group. So with that, with long-term epidemiology, like creatine supplementation is extremely safe. I mean, there's with the kidney thing, see, creatinine going a bit higher is just a normal byproduct of creatine metabolism. I've seen this personally working with some clients also who'll come in jacked up with big muscle mass and were taking creatine supplements. Their creatinine can be a bit higher. So in that case, you want to check the cystatin C. And then the GFR also can be calculated from creatinine or from cystatin C. And there's an equation which uses both of them together. So in people who have higher muscle mass and or are taking creatine supplements, you should always check the cystatin C to get the actual idea. In fact, cystatin C goes up if someone starts to have kidney decline, the cystatin C will increase even before the creatinine goes up. So it's a better marker. Of course, it's more expensive, but at least in that subgroup, like I would check for cystatin C because many people just get freaked out seeing bit higher creatinine with, having these kind of risk factors that way with having higher muscle mass and creatine supplementation. But it's not a problem at all. The creatinine doesn't reflect increased kidney deterioration for that subgroup.
Yeah. And your thoughts on caffeine?
Yeah. So I think coffee consumption is a very, very important health practice for large, when we see large scale studies specifically for certain prevention of cancers, for heart disease, for just general mortality, having a cup or two of coffee first half of the day is a very, very, cheap and easy thing to do to improve a lot of health outcomes. So I certainly have become a fan in the last couple of months. I try to have 1 to 2 cups of it myself every day. I don't think there are any interactions which should like mess up, creatine or anything in a negative fashion. No.
And Johan, the last question before we wrap up is on for vegetarians, what are your recommendations?
You mean for protein or generally?
Generally, like in terms of supplements, diet, what do you think? Because India full of vegetarians, so what do you want to share?
Yeah, so there are some at-risk nutrients which come up. See, don't get me wrong. So a lot of people actually assume that vegan vegetarian diets are more at risk for nutrient deficiencies. I can very reasonably argue to you that the carnivore diet is also at risk of nutrient deficiencies, just as the nutrients are different. So depending on the diet you're talking about, animal foods and plant foods are both good and bad at certain nutrients, and depending on which one we're talking about. And then even within animal foods, within plant foods, there's a lot of variation. There's some animal foods which are really high in some nutrients you're not going to get in other animal foods. There's some plant foods which are really good sources of something which you're not going to get in other plants. So when we're just vaguely, comparing broad diets, we're not really being accurately reflecting the true nature of things. But that being said, with a vegetarian diet, there are some at-risk nutrients. I would certainly think that zinc, iron, then there is a couple of others. I mean, like vitamin D, if someone doesn't have food sources and, they're not really kind of getting sunlight exposure, that becomes at risk. Iodine deficiencies are also important, especially people not having iodized salt, and then vegetarians would cut out fish and eggs, which can be important sources of iodine. Selenium can be a problem if someone's not having Brazil nuts as a vegetarian. Again, so there's some nutrients which the vegetarians can do fine if they plan their diet in a proper way, to include these things which are at risk. But there are certainly at risk. I mean, B12 is the one that we most popularly know about. And then there are conditional ones. I mean, for vitamin A, there are debates around conversion. Omega 3s are something you can't really get from plant foods at all unless you're having algae. So these are the main things top of my head that would be a problem that vegetarians should be more concerned, at least to screen these ones that are mainly come up as risks for people who broadly eat that kind of diet, and then try to go around fixing that.
So for omega-3, can't vegetarians get it from flaxseed oil?
Yeah, this has been very well studied actually. The conversion of ALA to EPA and DHA is extremely poor. You can't rely on it. They've done studies to try to use flaxseed oil and stuff to increase the omega-3 index. Those studies have very, very bad outcomes. There's barely any effect whatsoever. So the thing we want to think about is how can we increase our omega-3 index, because that's how we know there is enough EPA and DHA in the red blood cells. And the objective should be to try to use whatever method we can to do that. ALA based sources don't make it clearly. Like if you see the actual research, they're nowhere near enough to even barely increase the index. What we can rely upon is algae based. For vegans, algae based sources, they're incredibly expensive. And most of the algae omega 3s will only have DHA. They won't have EPA. And EPA is just as not important. Some researchers, depending on who you listen to, they'll argue that either of those are more important than the other, but definitely both of those are really important for different functions. DHA more so for brain health, EPA more so for like cardiac health, inflammatory, functions. So yeah, it's important to increase both of them to target levels, and to get to an index above 8% in the blood. And that can only be done with incredible amounts of seafood consumption on a daily basis, with like high EPA DHA containing seafood, or using uh, so if someone at an index of 4%, to go to 8%, you need around 2 grams of EPA DHA, not of not of fish oil, but of EPA DHA in a day. So that's very difficult to do. If you do the math on that, it's very, very hard to do, even with someone who's having seafood. So yeah, it's certainly omega 3s are definitely one thing that even if you listen to, a well-educated kind of evidence-based vegans online, they will be supplementing with creatine, with B12, with omega 3. So, I mean, yeah, it's just that people have to. There's no perfect diet where you can meet all your nutrients. This whole idea that we can get everything we want from food, living in this day and age. I mean, I would argue even in the past day and age, like it's certainly not easy. You can do it if you're being extremely mindful and you have all of food science figured out to understand where we're getting what quantity of and how much we really need. But yeah, I mean, supplements are crucial and they are life changers. If you identify a problem correctly and you intervene with the right dose of something, it can fully change your life. I've seen this again and again in my own personal journey in clients I work with. And it's often a big bias that people want to try and get something out of food where the food itself is limited from what it can give you. There's very good arguments to be made for targeted supplementation for sure. So people should be open to it. It's not something. At the same time, there are grifters who will try to sell you 100 different supplements on very flimsy grounds. So it's kind of like because of things like that, then people become overly skeptical. So just to have a balanced mind and then review the evidence on each of those individually and then decide if you should be taking something or not.
Yeah, great. So with that, we come to the end of this podcast. We've had
Awesome.
an amazing podcast with you, Johan. Thank you again for your time, for coming and giving us
No
so
worries.
many wonderful insights. We really appreciate it. Dev,
It was it was an awesome session. You know, took on both conventional nutrition wisdom and grifters at the same time.
Yeah, I love have a penchant for doing that these days. Love these kind of conversations for sure. Had a great time. Hope to see you guys soon.
definitely. Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.